Hello everyone, this is Michael Della Jacopo. Thank you for joining me on the Morality Aside podcast. Today I just got back to Los Angeles after attending the Reducitarian Summit in New York. You might already be familiar with this topic and my views on it from the last podcast episode, but if not, I'll save the intro for now because I'll do that later in the episode. At the conference, I managed to get the chance to chat with Tobias Leenaert, also known as the Vegan Strategist, and I've been a fan of Tobias's work for some time now. We'll get to my chat with Tobias in just a moment, but first I wanted to mention an exchange I had at the conference which I found quite interesting. I was with a few friends who were all involved in the Effective Altruism movement, which seeks to use evidence to find the most effective ways of improving the world, and we were chatting with one woman who had never heard of it before. After explaining the basic concepts, she said, "Oh, that sounds great, but I'm not earning a lot of money and I can't donate much to charity. Is there still a place in effective altruism for people like me?" The idea that effective altruism is all about money and donations is an old criticism, but it still comes up from time to time, and not to say that it was necessarily a criticism in this case. But of course, the point is just that taking a high-paying job and donating money to effective charities is just one effective way to do good, and that is often overlooked. But it is certainly not the only way, and not necessarily the best way. It depends in part on one's personal fit, their situation, and their individual skills. Effective altruism organisations and prominent individuals have made pains in recent years to explain that it's not just about money, but this was a reminder for me personally that maybe I should lead with other examples, such as saying one effective way of improving the world might be to go into advocacy or research on highly neglected but impactful causes. Another way of doing good that people often overlook is to donate some of your discretionary income to effective charities and maybe even take a higher paying job to earn and donate more. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting exchange. So without further ado, I give you my guest, Tobias Leenaert. Tobias Leenaert is one of the founders of Ethical Vegetarian Alternative, or EVA, which is a Belgian organisation that advocates the consumption of plant foods instead of animals. Tobias founded the Centre for Effective Vegan Advocacy, CEVA, with Melanie Joy, who you might know as the author of Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows. CEVA aims to increase the impact of vegan advocacy worldwide. I first heard about Tobias through his work on The Vegan Strategist, a blog where he talks about effective animal advocacy. He's also working on a book on vegan strategy and communication and gives talks around the world. Tobias, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Can you take a moment just to tell our listeners what your background is and what it is that you do?
So I do different things. I was a director of a vegetarian vegan organization for 15 years. Then I got a burnout and then I kind of reinvented myself. I started blogging at veganstrategist.org. And now indeed I'm working together with Melanie Joy, giving trainings worldwide. And I'm also a co-founder of ProVeg, which is an international food awareness organization that's pro-vegan or vegan, and that operates from Germany. And my focus these days is mainly kind of meta-activism. So while I used to talk to the people eating meat, I'm now talking to the people trying to convince other people not to eat meat. So I'm talking to activists now. I'm trying to help them do a better job, maybe, hopefully, or increase their effectiveness, increase their strategic thinking.
Mm-hmm. Great. A common theme of this podcast is the acknowledgement that there are a number of different ethical frameworks that people adopt, and that often disagreements of what we should do are the result of different frameworks, say deontology versus utilitarianism, rather than any actual disagreement on facts. If I may, I'd just like to ask you to briefly define your own ethical framework so we can approach today's discussion with having that in mind.
Yeah. So I'm not a professional philosopher. I'm not entirely versed in philosophical jargon. But I would say that I'm mainly consequentialist, utilitarian, even though I'm skeptical that anybody can be like a consistent consequentialist, let's say. Yeah. And I do have values that I find important, and I will not do everything for results. But mainly, when I advocate for animals, I want to look at results mainly, and what is true to me, what is, good for me or whatever is less important than what is effective and than what creates the results that I want to create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And for the record, my own ethical framework is something like, I guess, to use the jargon, classical hedonistic utilitarian, which just means I'm results-oriented. I value well-being and want to increase that, and disvalue suffering and want to decrease that in sentient beings. So we're here at the Reducitarian Summit today, and for those listening in, if you heard my last podcast, you'll be familiar with this as I review the book. But just for those who weren't, Reducitarianism is making a conscious effort to reduce the amount of animal products you consume based on one or more of the health, environmental, animal suffering, or other arguments, rather than completely eliminating. The Reducitarian approach, therefore, is to advocate for a reduction in animal products rather than something like veganism or vegetarianism. This approach certainly has the animal advocacy community divided in some respects, but as we've defined our ethical frameworks, we can purely approach this through the question of will this produce more well-being and less suffering than, say, promoting using a vegan message rather than a reducitarian message. One of the main reasons for disagreeing with reducitarianism seems to be that of dogma. One might argue that it's unethical to advocate for anything less than full veganism, regardless of the actual effect of doing so. However, the disagreement I'd like to spend more time addressing today is just is reducitarianism advocacy as effective, more or less effective than at reducing suffering than vegan advocacy. So I'd like to get your thoughts on any kind of nuances or pros and cons you think of these two different approaches.
Yeah, maybe some initial comments. First of all, I think there's one thing that trumps the approach I take, and that principle is the principle of, I would call it, adaptiveness. So you adapt your communication style and the content of your communication and your ask. You adapt it to the people who you have in front of you according to what you think will works. And in some cases that can be a go vegan approach. In other cases it's a reducitarian approach. So I'm not like stuck to that. I am sold on adaptiveness, and that is by definition it's like an anti-dogmatic approach. It's like, a dogmatic approach would say we have to always consistently advocate for veganism. To me that's dogma. To me, what matters is again results. And secondly, one important thing to remember, of course, is that most of the people I think who advocate for reducitarianism or who are reducitarian in their advocacy, to them also it's about creating a vegan world. And it's not that reducitarian situation or reduction is the end goal. It may be for some. It may be that some people who advocate reducitarianism are actually happy with a reducitarian world. I would not be. I would like to have a vegan world, but I think that a reducitarian message is an important and an effective one. I would say that at a minimum, a very minimum, we have, or the reducitarian approach has enough things going for it, and secondly, we are sufficiently uncertain about what works and what does not work. At a minimum, these two aspects justify, let's say, a strategic pluralism, which means that we need to apply different strategies, and different strategies of which we have suspicion that they may work. If something doesn't work, of course, then we shouldn't be applying that. But I think in this case, there's a good amount of arguments for reducitarianism, and so I would think it very wrong to throw it overboard for dogmatic reasons or whatever. Now, to answer your question about why would it work, why would it be effective, my main thing is that many reducitarians together, or many reducers together, let's say, many people who reduce their meat consumption or consumption of animal products, they would together have a bigger impact on society than a small number of vegans. And with a bigger impact, first of all, there's many more of them, and it's not just that they have a bigger impact on animal suffering, that they reduce animal suffering more because there's more of them, but also that they have a bigger impact on the market. And it is they who drive the market for now. Maybe in the future it will be the vegans, but for now it is the reducers. And I always say to vegans, the fact that for you today it's relatively easy to be a vegan, you have the reducers to thank, because they made it easier for you. And if you ask any restaurant, vegan restaurant or vegan producer, who do you primarily produce for, or who do you primarily cater to, they will say it's the reducers or the flexitarians. They could not live off the vegans alone. So that's one argument. And the second one is, let's say a second concern of the people who are against reduction is that these people well, they can do it for whatever reason. They don't believe in animal rights. But the thing is that, in my view, and not just in my view, but in the view of many psychologists and in psychology in general, is that when we create change, or when we want to create change, it's often so that a behavior change precedes an attitude change. Normally we think about this the other way around. We think like, I'm going to convince you of this or this value. You are going to see, thanks to my information, that it's wrong to eat animals, and therefore from that attitude you're going to stop eating animals. Behavior. But very often, and probably more often, it happens the other way around. People do something first for whatever reason, and then it becomes so much easier to be open for the reasons for that. So if I can get somebody to eat vegetarian or vegan one day a week, and they see it's feasible, it's doable, maybe for health reasons, then after doing that for a while, there's several mechanisms, several dynamics that explain why they would change their attitudes. And for instance, one thing is obviously that they see it's possible, and now they're more open to this animal rights philosophy. Another is that like it becomes part of their identity. They see like, oh, I am a person who does this kind of thing, and this gets reinforced. So it's very important to realize that that this attitude change can follow a behavior change, and we don't necessarily need to advocate about animal rights all the time, because the animal rights conscience, the awareness of the importance of animals and the awareness of animal suffering and the importance and the concern for that can follow later, and does not to be the starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In my kind of own journey towards becoming vegan, I first went vegetarian actually as kind of a challenge put forth to me by my vegan friend, and the main argument that kind of swung me to do that was the environmental impact. I wasn't so much thinking about the animal rights or animal welfare back then. And I this was initially a 1-week challenge, and then I thought, hey, this is pretty easy, so I just kept doing it. And then it took me almost 2 years to actually start to then realize about the other issues, the animal welfare issues. And I do wonder, and it's just one piece, it was just one data point, but I do wonder, just how strong the impact is, whether just in getting people to eat more vegan foods, or to try it out, whether that actually leads them to be more receptive to the arguments.
Yeah. So I think there's not a lot of research, at least in our domain. It seems that whenever I talk to psychologists, they seem to accept it as a given that it happens more often with behavior first rather than attitude change, than attitude first. And I feel that in our movement, we don't realize that this is like almost like that. It's very accepted among psychologists. You can also see, many people know, maybe from their own experience even, but also from other people around them, that there's many people who start going vegan for health reasons, and they develop the animal rights reasons and the concerns along the way. And there's prominent activists today who started for health reasons, and they had a medical problem or something, and they stopped eating meat, and then they became animal rights activists. So it happens all the time like that.
Mm-hmm. I really liked your point before about being adaptive in your use of messaging, and I really like that. I think that often gets overlooked, even by myself. But I'd just like to kind of dive down a little bit on that if we can. So in what situations can you think of any examples where you might, say, opt to use one approach over another? So whether it's like whether it's, say, more something like corporate or government outreach, or whether it's just kind of in a one-on-one interaction. So, yeah.
So a couple of examples. When you have a person in front of you and you're talking to them and you want to influence them in a way, it's much easier, of course, to get to know them than when you have suppose I asked you, like, if I gave you $1 million for an advertising campaign for mass media, for broadcasting, what would your message be? And there you have no idea what your audience will be like. You have to kind of like get to know the lowest common denominator. You have to be basing yourself on research. So that's, and there probably you're going to see that most people care more about health, environment maybe, and then maybe it might be a more interesting message when you're broadcasting to 1 million people to say something about health or environment or about reduction. Another example is when you talk to a politician or to a decision maker, like you say, it is usually the health and the environmental arguments that are more relevant to them, that are more socially relevant. They are not like bleeding hearts people who like care about the animals necessarily. They will care about what their electorate cares about, and they will know that. In many cases there are officials of the environment and of health, but not of animal welfare, for instance, or it's like a small thing within a government or a local government or whatever. So. Or also very simply, if you have a person in front of you who is the Minister of the Environment or whatever, you're not going to talk, I think, about animal rights. You're going to talk about the environment because that is what concerns them. And there are some people who say like, no, we have to always talk about the animals because it is about the animals. But what I say is it's not because we're not talking about the animals that we're not working for them. It's not because we're not like addressing those issues directly that we're not working for the improvement of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember who said this. One of my favorite paraphrase quotes is, the animals don't care what message you use to help them. They
Exactly.
just care how much they're being helped.
Yeah, and I mean, of course we do want people to care in the end. And I'm all in favor of people picking up in the end the right the important moral motivations and the fact that they care, because this is the most permanent change, and this is also what we want people to be. We want them to be good people who care about animals. We don't want like some kind of accidentally vegan world. We want like an intentionally vegan world. But again, these changes, this consciousness can follow behavior change. It can come later. We don't necessarily have to start with it.
One more thing I'd just like to chat about a little bit. There are a few, I guess I'd call them reservations about the reducitarian approach. Not so much saying that we can't use a reducitarian approach, but just some things I want to be cautious about. One of them is I'm concerned about, because a lot of the reducitarian approach uses health and environmental reasons. One, I guess the main cause of issues in both of those areas tends to be red or processed meat for health, and say like beef, red meat for the environmental issues. And my concern, I guess, is my tentative concern is if we focus on environmental health, or even not even just focus, if that's being used, then there's potential, I think, for people to reduce their red meat, processed meat consumption, but then maybe to, say, consume more eggs or more fish or chicken, which may lead to an increase in suffering. I don't know whether it does. I don't know if there's enough data to say that it does, or say that is the case. But I guess what I want to put back to you is, do you think that could be a potential issue? And if so, how might we frame the message in order to make sure that people don't switch from, say, like red meat to increasing their chicken and fish consumption?
Yeah, several answers. Well, first of all, the research doesn't seem to be clear about whether that is happening or not. Matt Ball from One Step for Animals, he says he has clear indications. He believes that this is happening. Other sources say that this is not clearly happening, or that there's no evidence for it. Secondly, I think that, it is of course possible to also with the reducitarian message to give a voice to these concerns about a shift, a substitution effect from let's say cows to chickens or to fish, and so we can take that into account. That it is a possibility, and I agree it is a risk. It is a possibility. So we can talk about don't shift from this to this, because then you have an adverse effect for animals, and we also want to take care about animals. So that's important. And then thirdly, I would say even if there is an increase in chicken or fish consumption, what we might see, for instance, is that if I tell somebody reduce, that they would I'm imagining they could, for instance, replace a certain quantity of beef by chicken and eat more chicken, but a certain quantity of beef they're also going to, if our system works, going to replace it by a vegetarian, plant-based dish, vegan dish, whatever. And the fact that they do that is so important. This is the first step. So even if there's a temporary increase in chicken or fish consumption, if the gate is open to trying vegetarian, vegan products or dishes, then this is a very important fact. And in a second phase, this temporary increase of chicken and fish could be annihilated. So you can imagine, for instance, if a child grows up with parents who are reducitarians and who may eat even more chicken or fish, but who put vegetarian vegan dishes on the menu now and then, that child would there would be more chance that that child gets to know vegetarian dishes and can evolve further and further. So it's not, I mean, it's really important to look at concrete results, but sometimes maybe we pick too short-term results and we need to look a bit in the longer term. So yeah, I think it's a complicated question, and I'm certainly not in favor of saying like, well, this is just leading to more chicken and fish, we cannot do it. I think it's more complicated.
Sure, exactly. Yep. So Tobias, you have a forthcoming book by the name of How to Create a Vegan World, a Pragmatic Approach. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what you're talking about there and what your aims are?
So this is very much a niche book, and it is aimed at the vegan animal rights movement. Other people will not necessarily be able to use it that much. And it is intended to show to our movement why a pragmatic approach works and why it doesn't just work, it is necessary at this point. And it's necessary because I start by describing the situation today, which is the situation in which we are incredibly dependent, both as individuals and as a society, on the use of animals. And in a situation like that, where people have animal products 3 times a day and where there's like entire economies dependent on using and abusing animals, in a situation like that, moral arguments and go vegan arguments alone will not make it, will not assure success. So I'm explaining how, in addition to a go vegan for the animals movement, we also need a reduce for any reason ask. And in addition to that, I'll describe also what I call creating a facilitating environment, an environment that facilitates change, because if we agree that behavior change first is an important aspect of advocacy, then we have to make it easier for people to demonstrate that behavior. We have to make the good thing the easy thing, and people start doing that, and then they can change their attitudes. So that's another very important aspect of that. And then I have a final chapter which is about communication, about veganism. And I'm not saying that we should avoid talking about veganism, but I'm wondering, like, if we talk about veganism, how should we define veganism? And I'm in favor of defining it in a way, or maintaining a concept that is just a bit less rigid than what most people do. And I think that would greatly benefit the numbers of vegans that we get. And this is about, I argue that 100% consistency is unproductive and is redundant, is not necessary at all. And I give, I think, some good reasons for that. And I know this is, controversial, but I'm really convinced that if we saw veganism as a 99% thing rather than a 100% thing, we would make really great strides to advance the cause for animals.
Okay, great. When can we look forward to reading your book?
Should be out in, I think, end of July or August or something.
Fantastic. Yeah, look forward to it. Great. So I think we'll wrap it up here. But if anyone's interested in finding out more about your work or finding out more about you, where can they get that information?
So that would be at veganstrategist.org, and also there is a website. The website of CEVA is veganadvocacy.org.
Fantastic. Tobias, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my chat with Tobias Leenaert. If you enjoyed this and want to hear more, make sure to subscribe to my website, michaeldella.com, or like the podcast on Facebook, which you can find by just searching Morality is Hard. A few people have asked why we don't have a feed or why we aren't on iTunes yet. Rest assured we'll have both of those soon, but for now you can continue to listen to the podcast either on my website, on SoundCloud, or on YouTube. So I hope you enjoy this podcast, and until next time, this is the Morality is Hard podcast.